Hurricane Gilbert was one of the most destructive and intense hurricanes ever recorded in the Atlantic. In fact, when it hit in 1988, it was considered the most powerful hurricane in the Atlantic basin in terms of barometric pressure, a record that stood until 2005 when Hurricane Wilma surpassed it. Gilbert formed during the 1988 Atlantic hurricane season, which had already been active. However, no one expected the level of devastation this storm would bring. The story of Hurricane Gilbert starts in early September 1988. It began as a tropical wave off the northwestern coast of Africa, like many Atlantic hurricanes do. As it crossed the Atlantic, it gradually gained strength, eventually growing into a massive Category 5 hurricane, the most powerful on the Saffir-Simpson scale. At its peak, it had sustained winds of 185 miles per hour, and its massive wind field stretched up to 575 miles in diameter, making it one of the largest hurricanes ever observed in the Atlantic. Gilbert first made landfall in Jamaica on September 12, 1988, before continuing its path of destruction through the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. The storm's sheer size and strength made it one of the most dangerous and costly hurricanes in history, leaving a path of devastation in its wake. Entire regions were flattened, thousands of homes were destroyed, and it led to the deaths of over 400 people. The storm caused approximately $3 billion in damage, and its name was retired forever due to its catastrophic impact. In the aftermath, Hurricane Gilbert left an indelible mark on the Caribbean, Mexico, and the Gulf Coast. Its widespread destruction to communities, lives, and economies made it a defining moment for the Atlantic hurricane season of 1988. This storm was one of the worst natural disasters of the time, and it took years for many affected regions to fully recover. To understand the full scope of this devastating event, we need to look at how it all began and how it grew into the monster storm that it became. Hurricane Gilbert's origins can be traced back to a tropical wave, a low-pressure system moving from east to west, that moved off the coast of Africa on September 3, 1988. For several days, this wave traveled across the Atlantic, remaining relatively disorganized. However, on September 8th, satellite images revealed that the system was starting to develop a well-defined circulation center. At this point, it was located roughly 400 miles east of Barbados, and meteorologists began to take notice. By the next day, the National Hurricane Center, NHC, classified it as a tropical depression, the 12th of the season. As the tropical depression moved west-northwestward, it encountered favorable conditions for strengthening: warm ocean waters and low wind shear. On September 9th, the depression intensified into Tropical Storm Gilbert. Over the next few days, it steadily gained strength as it passed through the Lesser Antilles, bringing high winds and heavy rains to the islands. By late on September 10th, Gilbert had intensified into a hurricane as it moved south of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. By this time, warnings were being issued across the Caribbean. Gilbert's rapid intensification continued. On September 11th, it became a Category 3 major hurricane, with winds of 125 miles per hour. It was clear that this was no ordinary storm, and preparations were ramping up across the Caribbean. In Jamaica, hurricane warnings were issued, and residents were urged to evacuate coastal areas and prepare for the worst. Schools, businesses, and government offices were closed, and thousands of people sought shelter. Airlines canceled flights to and from the region, and in the Cayman Islands, residents were evacuated by Cayman Airways as the storm barreled toward them. Across the region, people were bracing for a potentially catastrophic event. Despite these preparations, many did not fully realize the scale of the disaster they were about to face. On September 12th, Gilbert made landfall on Jamaica as a Category 3 hurricane. It was the first major hurricane to hit the island directly in over 30 years. The storm's 15-mile-wide eye passed directly over the island, battering it with torrential rains and devastating winds. But this was just the beginning, as Gilbert was about to grow even stronger as it moved back over open waters. Hurricane Gilbert's most destructive phase began after it made landfall in Jamaica on September 12, 1988. While Jamaica bore the brunt of the storm initially, this was only the start of Gilbert's deadly path through the Caribbean and beyond. After devastating Jamaica, the storm moved westward into the warm waters of the Caribbean Sea, where it rapidly intensified. Within hours, Gilbert had reached Category 5 intensity, the highest possible rating on the Saffir-Simpson scale. By September 13th, Gilbert had become a monster storm, with sustained winds of 185 miles per hour, and its central pressure had dropped to 888 millibars, making it the most intense hurricane ever recorded in the Atlantic up until that time. As Gilbert approached Mexico's Yucatán Peninsula, its massive size and strength became even more apparent. Tropical storm force winds extended outward for 575 miles from the storm's center, making it one of the largest Atlantic hurricanes ever observed. The Yucatán Peninsula was directly in Gilbert's path, and on September 14th, the storm made landfall near the island of Cozumel. At landfall, Gilbert was still a Category 5 hurricane, with winds of 165 miles per hour. The impact on the region was catastrophic. Entire communities were flattened by the powerful winds, and a massive storm surge inundated coastal areas. The popular tourist destination of Cancun saw 60% of its beaches washed away, and inland flooding extended up to 3 miles. In addition to the wind and surge, Gilbert dumped over 13 inches of rain in some parts of the Yucatán Peninsula, causing flash flooding and landslides. More than 60,000 homes were destroyed, leaving tens of thousands of people homeless. Over 80 ships sank during the storm, and many areas were completely cut off due to the damage. But Gilbert wasn't finished yet. After crossing the Yucatán, the storm weakened slightly over land, but as it moved into the Gulf of Mexico on September 15th, it began to strengthen again. By the time it made landfall in mainland Mexico on September 16th, it was a Category 3 hurricane, packing winds of 125 miles per hour. The storm moved inland, lashing the city of Monterey with heavy rain and high winds, causing widespread flooding and killing over 150 people. In total, Gilbert was responsible for killing over 430 people across the Caribbean, Mexico, and the Gulf Coast, making it one of the deadliest storms of the 20th century. But the destruction didn't end with its landfall in Mexico. The storm's remnants continued to wreak havoc as it moved north into Texas, bringing tornadoes, flooding, and additional damage. The destruction caused by Hurricane Gilbert was truly staggering. Across the Caribbean, Mexico, and parts of the United States, the storm left behind a trail of devastation that took years to recover from. In total, the storm caused nearly $3 billion in damage, making it one of the most costly hurricanes in history at the time. In Jamaica, where the storm made its first landfall, the damage was extensive. Entire communities were flattened, and many homes and businesses were destroyed. The storm left over $700 million in damage on the island, and it took years for the country to fully recover. The powerful winds and heavy rains caused widespread flooding and landslides, particularly in mountainous areas, and the island's agricultural sector was hit hard, with crops like bananas and sugarcane being wiped out. In Mexico, the impact was even more severe. The Yucatán Peninsula, particularly the coastal areas of Cancun and Cozumel, was hit hardest by Gilbert's ferocious winds and storm surge. Entire stretches of coastline were washed away, and many tourist areas were left in ruins. In the days following the storm, more than 5,000 American tourists were evacuated from Cancun, as the city's infrastructure was in tatters. The inland city of Monterey also faced devastating flooding, as rivers overflowed their banks, washing away homes, vehicles, and even entire buses filled with people. More than 150 people were killed in Monterey alone, many of them swept away by the raging floodwaters. Across northern Mexico, heavy rainfall caused rivers to swell and landslides to occur, leaving many areas cut off from rescue efforts. Even the United States felt the effects of Hurricane Gilbert. Though Texas narrowly avoided a direct hit, the storm's outer bands spawned tornadoes across the state, causing additional damage. Nearly 30 tornadoes were recorded in Texas, including several that caused significant destruction in the San Antonio area. The storm also caused widespread beach erosion along the Gulf Coast, though the damage in the U.S. was relatively minor compared to the destruction in the Caribbean and Mexico. In total, more than 35,000 people were left homeless by the storm, and many areas struggled to rebuild in the aftermath. The sheer scale of the destruction was unprecedented, and it took years for many of the affected regions to recover. The storm's name, Gilbert, was retired by the World Meteorological Organization in 1989 due to the extensive damage it caused, a decision made for storms that have a particularly devastating impact. Hurricane Gilbert was more than just a powerful storm. It was a catastrophic event that changed the lives of millions of people in its path. The storm's legacy is one of destruction, loss, and resilience as the affected regions work to rebuild in the years following the disaster. For Jamaica, Mexico, and the other areas hit by Gilbert, it was a sobering reminder of the power of nature and the vulnerability of coastal communities to hurricanes. One of the lasting impacts of Hurricane Gilbert was the widespread recognition of the need for better disaster preparedness and response in the Caribbean and Gulf Coast regions. In the years following the storm, many countries invested in improved forecasting and early warning systems, as well as stronger building codes and infrastructure designed to withstand hurricanes. In the scientific community, Gilbert's intensity and size provided valuable data that helped researchers better understand the behavior of Category 5 hurricanes. The storm's record-breaking low pressure and massive wind field were key factors in advancing our understanding of how hurricanes develop and intensify, especially in the warm waters of the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. Gilbert also had a profound impact on the economies of the regions it affected. In Jamaica, the storm caused extensive damage to the island's agricultural sector, particularly the banana and sugarcane industries, which took years to recover. In Mexico, the storm had a devastating impact on the tourism industry, particularly in Cancun and Cozumel. The region's economy, heavily reliant on tourism, was crippled as hotels and resorts were destroyed and thousands of tourists were evacuated in the aftermath of the storm. Despite the destruction, Hurricane Gilbert also highlighted the resilience of the people in its path. In the face of such overwhelming devastation, communities came together to rebuild and recover. In Jamaica, Mexico, and the Gulf Coast, people worked tirelessly to rebuild homes, businesses, and infrastructure in the years following the storm. Today, Gilbert remains a benchmark for other major hurricanes. Its legacy is still felt in the regions it affected, and its name is remembered as one of the most destructive storms in history. The lessons learned from Hurricane Gilbert have helped shape how we prepare for and respond to hurricanes today, ensuring that future storms, while still dangerous, will not catch us unprepared.